Okay, so first of all, thank you for being here on this very glorious Wednesday for our second session on vocabulary. And if you got the PowerPoint, you know that this is a really long session. And some of it I will have to do with your coaches at your schools so we can get everything in. Why would we put so much energy into vocabulary? Well, because words are all we have to express our thoughts, to express our feelings, to express our ideas, whether it is verbally or in writing. And we have a constant flood of materials to read, and that's very dependent on the vocabulary that's embedded. It's also one of my favorite topics in terms of, wow, we know a lot about teaching vocabulary that all of us should have down and be able to put into practice. So like everything we've done, this is a pretty pragmatic session, things that could be instant takeaways. So the first thing I would like you to do is to grab a piece of paper and on the top of it to write best practices. And so as we go forward, if there is a practice that you say, as a third grade teacher, I really want to add that to my repertoire. As an interventionist, this would be very helpful to the students that I have that are in fourth grade. So you're going to make a note of it so that you can then sit down with your colleagues at your grade level where we have that collective efficacy that our teaching really makes a difference. And then you could go out and put it in practice with children. So our whole goal is increasing academic vocabulary of elementary students for many reasons, such as increasing their comprehension. Now, just to bring us up to date, because this is part 2, when we look at the research on vocabulary, there's many components to it. But first, just a reminder that you will be actively participating. So I will sometimes teach lessons where you'll be the students and you'll give all the answers, but you'll be muted. Sometimes I will ask you to read something chorally with me, but you'll be muted because we just can't sync all of our voices together. And we will also, in some cases, use close reading, all read, stop, and you'll say the next word. So be ready to participate. And I'm going to call on some students today, which would be you, to add 2 answers after you've had a chance to think and practice and write down your answers. All right, so if we were to look through many studies about what we could do to improve vocabulary at a school site, and Michael Graves in a Teaching Reading Academy listed these. And they're very consistent across all the many books and presentations I've seen on vocabulary. 1, expose students to high quality oral language, which is what we did in part 1. And explicitly teach word meanings, which we're going to do right now in part 2. And it will just add to and affirm what you're already doing, because I've talked to many of your leaders and almost all of you have routines for teaching vocabulary that are consistent with research. And so we'll just polish it up a bit. And teaching students word learning strategies, which how to use context, how to utilize the morphographic elements of words, how to use resources to figure out meanings of words, so that you can figure out an unfamiliar word's meaning while you are reading text. And getting kids to read and read and read some more has a profound effect on their vocabulary. Of course, first they have to be accurate, fluent readers, so it's not laborious to read. And when they have ease of reading, really encouraging lots of outside of school reading makes a difference. So these are the topics that we are going to add to what we did last time. But first, let us review the big ideas from our last part 1. So this is the list of things And again, get your best practices out there if you need to have a reminder. So expose students to high quality oral language. Number one, use words that are not common. So infuse in our own speech to students, our own communications to students, words that might not currently be in their lexicon, their personal group of words. But then we have to do that fast mapping. We have to give them a little explanation of unfamiliar words. And the term fast mapping is a great one to post in your room to remind you, give a little explanation of many words. Of course, we're going to continue in science and social studies, in art and music and PE, using academic vocabulary. So it's not going to be the top number, it's going to be the numerator. And we're going to, when we read stories to students, and we watched a video on this, we're going to intentionally infuse the meanings of unfamiliar words with what? Fast mapping. And read alouds I went through because this is critical for particularly pre-K, kindergarten, first, second grade. Most of the foundation of reading comprehension is built through systematic intentional read alouds, where the books are above the student's current reading level. They're at first grade, so it might be a book written at the 5th or 6th grade level. Half of the books are informational text. It's really useful to have informational texts that are on the same topic, so the students build a knowledge network, which really serves them. And as we read the book, we give a little explanation of unknown words. And we ask questions to actively involve the students. And before we read a book, we directly teach vocabulary words. So those are the big ideas from our last visit. And today, we're going to look at a routine for teaching the meaning of words. And we're going to look at selection of vocabulary. Then we're going to look at vocabulary routines. And mine might be just a little different than the one that you're using in your current program. But I have looked at the one in Core Knowledge and in Wonders and in Journeys, and they're very similar. And then we're going to look at some extensions that have research validity, things that we could add as we're teaching vocabulary. Like if I have 4th graders, I'm going to add the part of speech. If I have 5th graders, I'm going to add all of the relatives, the most critical relatives of the word. I'm not just going to teach protect, but protection, protecting, protected, and some practice activities, not so that you would do all of them, but that you say, ooh, that one is a great one. I'm going to do that with my students, that you could pluck out some further practice in the vocabulary words. And then we're going to look at, we hope to get to it, independent word learning strategies. And it won't surprise you at all what they are. One, if I don't know the meaning of a word, I could use the context clues. Now, this is where we've often made an error. Context clues are useful for figuring out the meaning of a word, but not the pronunciation. If I don't know the pronunciation of the word, I need to look at the letters and use the letter sound association to figure out the pronunciation. If I don't know the meaning, then I can use the context clues to support the meaning of the word. And we'll look at prefixes, suffixes, and roots, something that we should begin teaching lightly in 1st grade, more so in 2nd, big time in 3rd grade, and major time in 4th and 5th grade. And we might teach kids how to use other sources, which are constantly changing. I remember 50 years ago teaching students how to use a traditional dictionary. Now we just type in the word and just have it come up, but we still have some skills there, like there's more than one meaning of the word. Which one is the right one for this context? And then just a reminder about How? Wide reading makes a difference. Your readers and your vocabulary grows with every book you read. You may not even be aware as new words come into your lexicon. So that is what we're going to do. But we started last time with the importance of vocabulary in terms of students. But I want us to take a moment and think about why vocabulary instruction in school sites is important, why vocabulary instruction is important. So you need a piece of scratch paper throughout our time together. And you're going to write down this sentence starter. Vocabulary instruction in our schools is important because. Vocabulary instruction is important in our schools because. Okay, and your job is to finish that sentence. All right. So that is one. I had you do that for a very special purpose, is particularly for our teachers that are 4th and 5th grade teachers. What we're finding is that if we have students write down, we ask them a question, and it's a major question in this case, and we have them write down their answer, and then say it to themselves or say it to their partner before we call on them, the quality of the answers go way up. So I just constantly am seeing this. If I just have a really important question and say, once tell your partner, they've really not had a time to process it, develop it into a higher level. And so this is a reminder to us that writing down an answer, even writing the bullet points that you're going to cover, significantly increases the quality, higher order thinking. Okay, so I'm going to do what I would do with students, okay, just because we're constantly modeling what would be useful to you. So you're not masked because you're not around children, but put your hand, I just did this yesterday with children, put your hand over the mask and say your sentence into the mask. Okay, so right now in schools, I am having children say answers into their mask, out saying it loudly. I mean, not loudly, but having them say it out loud, not just think about it, but say it. And a teacher said yesterday, well, what if we have no masks? I said, well, fine, they'll talk into their hand. But again, it is making the response more overt, and it's going to make more difference. And so I'm going to call on Tabitha to share her sentence. And go, Tabitha.
Vocabulary instruction is important in our schools because students are less likely to be told oral language or oral stories from older generations and have lost the exposure to that vocabulary.
All right, so some of them may hear less language in their school site or in their home environments. Excellent. And looking at here, randomly calling on someone. And Todd, what did you have?
I wrote that vocabulary instruction is important in our schools because language comprehension is part of the simple view of reading. And without vocabulary knowledge, there'd be limited language comprehension and therefore limited reading comprehension. And as I looked ahead on the slides, no, I was just in a
no, that was a beautiful answer.
It was related to that. And I did look at slide 7 though, and it's really worse than I thought, because it looks like it's 90 to 95% of their reading comprehension is dependent on their language.
That's right. All right. So thank you too for participating. So mine was vocabulary instruction is important in our schools because, number one, vocabulary is directly related both to expressive and receptive language in terms of speaking and reading. Number two, children come in with very different vocabularies, thus we have to fill the gap through instruction. And number three, in the end, words are all we have to express our thoughts and ideas. I've been thinking about vocabulary too much, obviously. All right, keep that scratch paper handy because we will add to it. But let's look at the slides that Todd has already previewed for us. So yes, receptive language is based on, do I understand the words? When I'm reading, do I understand the words? When I am listening, do I understand the words? Necessary for comprehension. And in the expressive language, if I am writing and I want to make it very clear, I need to use the precision of my vocabulary. Similarly, when I am speaking, I need to utilize words that convey, that communicate, that have clarity for the listener. So basically for receptive and receptive language. And as Todd said, it is very highly related to reading comprehension. So when we look at research in terms of predicting students' comprehension, it is related to, do they understand the words embedded in what they're reading? First, they have to be able to read the words. So decoding is one of the major challenges with students who are struggling readers, but then they have to have the language to support the vocabulary. And so reading this with me, but stay muted, adequate reading comprehension depends on a person already knowing between 90 and 90%, 95% of the words in a text. And so these studies were done particularly by Nagy and a great researcher who has asked this question throughout his career. You have to understand it. Now, if you're reading narrative stories, you have more tolerance for not knowing every single word because you can still get the plot. If the author utilizes a word that's unfamiliar to you, many times you still get the plot. But if you're reading informational text, then you need even a higher understanding of the words to have comprehension of that text. Though sometimes informational text gives us more context clues. So now, remember last time we talked about two different thoughts about vocabulary. One is that teachers, to increase vocabulary, should flood the children with vocabulary. And that's what we talked about last time in our oral language, flooding them with words. that may not be heard in their home, may not be heard on television in America. And then just pairing in with fast mapping the meaning of the word. We want to keep the flood going, but there is also research to support the few. So reading with me and go. To develop vocabulary intentionally, that's what we're about, intentional. Students should be explicitly taught both specific words, which we're going to look at, and word learning strategies, so they can figure out the meaning of unknown words on their own. So we got the flood of vocabulary surrounding them in the school. We even get the secretary and the custodian to join us in this, pairing in the meaning of the word as they speak, along with a few words that we directly teach. And we also teach kids some strategies for figuring out unknown words. So we're going to look at explicit instruction of vocabulary. Now we have an art teacher, we have a music teacher. They have their own vocabulary that needs to be taught. We have our reading programs, which identify words and sometimes too many, so we have to be selective. We have science, and we have to selectively teach words there, and math and social studies. Basically, almost in every class, we would be teaching some vocabulary. So this applies to all of us in terms of filling in the gap for students. Now, here's what is interesting though. And by Miller, in both of the materials that I read by him, cites this evidence. So again, I'm going to read and you're going to say the next word. Evidence suggests that as late as 6th grade, about 80% of words are learned as a result of direct explanation, either as a result of the student's request or instruction, usually by a teacher. So now, why this is critical is that for the students that you serve, most words that are entering their lexicon, their personal storage of words, are words that they've said, what does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean? And we've taught them what the word meant, or intentional teaching by a teacher to support what's read in science, what is explained in social studies, what is occurring in the reading book. Now, this continues. You still learn vocabulary directly taught to you in middle school and high school and college and beyond. But then most of the words are added because you've read them. So as I become a very proficient reader, as you all are, the vocabulary that's entering and adding to your lexicon comes from what you are reading. But in elementary school, it is very intentional teaching by the teacher. So we better do that so that we know that direct vocabulary instruction makes a difference. And Marzano wrote a whole book on this. And we know that it is highly related to comprehension. In fact, one of the ways to improve comprehension on a specific text is to pre-teach vocabulary that is critically embedded within that material. In fact, the effect size, which effect sizes say how effective it is, and it ranges from 0 to 1. So do you realize how impossible it is in research studies to get an effect size of 0.97? It means that it is like a terribly important part of what we do to increase comprehension on what we are reading. So let's look at explicit vocabulary instruction procedures. Sort of wedge together what we've done on explicit instruction and what we are doing in terms of what to teach in vocabulary. So the questions I often get are, well, what vocabulary words should I teach? Which is a very valid question, given that English has more than 1,120,000 words. So how can I hone in on the words that are most useful when I teach a few? Well, what should you do? Well, it would be useful, first of all, to teach a limited number of words in depth, a limited number of words in depth. Some of the lists that I've looked at had like 20 words that you're supposed to teach in one session, which means they're all going to get light touch. And some of them were important enough in the material they're reading today, as well as in the future, that they should have more in-depth instruction. And so I looked to see what might be a recommended number in a session. So I'm teaching vocabulary in preparation for this story. I'm teaching vocabulary before this unit in math. I'm teaching vocabulary before this project in art. And consistently, researchers would say, well, 3 to 5 words in depth. Well, that's 5 words out of the list of 20. What am I going to do with the others? You're going to do the fast mapping. You're going to give the students a brief meaning of the words, particularly the words that needed for comprehension, but you're not going to go in depth. So we've got in-depth words and light touch words. So how to pick the in-depth words? Well, it would start with teach words that are unknown. So one day I am preparing for teaching a lesson in a standard reading program, and they have a list of words to teach, and number 1 on the list was the word pizza. I believe that any child, even if they were an immigrant child who flew in yesterday, they would know pizza. Skip pizza. So we're going to start with words that are unknown, or maybe not deeply known. And we're going to ask ourselves, is that word critical for understanding the unit that I'm teaching, the material we're going to read? Is it critical? And not just in the moment, but in the future. Will they hear this word in the future? So that I want to give energy to it. So I'm picking words that are unknown, critical for the current passage that we're reading, and words that would be useful in the future for in-depth instruction. And now, if we look at different ways that words have been categorized, it gives us an idea of what words to focus on. So Isabel Beck and Margaret McCowan, 2 excellent researchers in the area of vocabulary, write great books for elementary teachers on vocabulary. They came up with a system of categorization of vocabulary: Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, Tier 4. For our interventionists here and special educators, they're thinking, oh, Tier 1, is that response to intervention? Well, no, that was a category system that came out of the work of Sharon Vaughn's research team on intervention. I just wish that, because they came out the same year, I just wish they would have talked to each other, Sharon and Isabel, and said, okay, I'm using the term tier, you don't, but they both did. So Tier 1, these are words in conversation that I might introduce intensely to someone who is learning English as an additional language, but most of our students would already have these words in their personal lexicon. And then we have general academic vocabulary. Some of you might have been around during Reading First. And during Reading First, I did the national training on vocabulary and with Torgerson. And we talked about particularly honing in on general academic vocabulary. These are words I often refer to as the suitcase words. That's because they're words that are not likely to be learned independently just from the language around you, but are used in many different domains. They might hear it in an English class, in a math class, in a science class. Thus the term suitcase words, because they could go with you to every domain. So examples. Many of them are directive words like summarize. We could summarize what we read in our reading lesson. We could summarize what we've learned about the Civil War in our social studies class. We could summarize the steps that we're going to go through in order to do a watercolor. So these words have utility. I would suggest, having looked at state tests in Ohio, that you get the list of directive words and be certain that your students have learned those, because sometimes they're missing items on your state test because they don't understand the general academic vocabulary embedded in those questions. So just more examples. Tier 3 are ones that are domain specific, that you would hear them in math. And for example, the term addition, an operation, but you might not hear that in a reading or an art class. You hear the word plot in a language arts class, but you don't hear, well, you hear plot as used a different way in mathematics. So they are often low frequency words. And they're limited often to one domain, one subject area, and they're critical for growth in that subject area. Now, unfortunately, when we did reading first, we said put all your energy in those tier 2 words that go with you to other domains. Now I would say, let's do both tier 2 and tier 3. Remember last week we talked about reading, or last time we met, 50% of the material should be informational text. That's a lot of academic vocabulary embedded in them, but that's going to help them in their future studies in science or math or social studies. So both would be useful. So I added lots of examples just because I want you to know that in every subject area, we have domain-specific vocabularies we could teach. So in language arts, I could teach plot and problem and events. In math, I have so many vocabulary words in elementary math. I could teach you what is greater than, less than. I could teach you what an array is. I could teach you what parallel is. In social studies, maybe we're doing social studies in 2nd grade and learning about cities and towns and suburbs. In science, we have many, many words. Now, I should know precipitation before I leave elementary school. I should know evaporation and condensation. And in visual arts, and in music, and in PE. All of us can be teaching vocabulary. And if you have a vocabulary initiative at your school, everybody's got to be on board so that the students come out with filling in some of that gap that differentiates based on home environment and experiences, and so that everyone has high level vocabulary. Well, so we have selected words that are unknown. We have selected words that are critical in the moment. We've selected words that would be words in the future, particularly focusing on tier 2 words that are suitcase words, tier 3 words that are words that are domain specific. And now here's some extra things that might say, oh, I should put time in this word because. Well, one reason would be that it has something that would generalize, like it has some relatives, some words that are related to it. So I teach invent, inventing, invented, invention, inventor. So there was extra value in teaching invent in terms of relatives and the possibility of generalizing from one word to other words. Or maybe there is a meaningful part in the word. For example, maybe the prefix re in remake, and we could generalize it to return. Maybe the prefix un is there, and we could use it in uncover, but we could also generalize it to other words like unfriendly or ish, a little. It's greenish, a little green. Generalize in terms of weird families, generalize in terms of meaningful parts, generalize to other words. And sometimes we just need to teach a word because it is more difficult to obtain. So what makes it more difficult? Well, if a word has a concrete referent, it is much easier than learning a word that has an abstract referent. And so a word like elephant is easy to teach because it's very concrete. You could show a picture of an elephant. If you are teaching a word such as unambiguous, be a little bit more challenging. So that's what makes it more difficult. So this is my criteria. Well, so a word that does not have a known synonym is more difficult to teach, and one that's not clearly defined in the material is more difficult to teach. So here's the summary that you're going to use in a minute to pick out your favorite words. I am going to put more energy into words that are unknown, critical to the passage, useful in the future, and have something that could be generalized. Maybe word relatives, maybe a meaningful part, but simply words that are more difficult to obtain independently. A little checklist, if you sit down with your third grade teachers and the long list from your reading program to teach, and you could say, which one of these are we going to teach in depth? The other ones will just tell the meaning of the word with really no help. They would know it to comprehend what we're reading, but they may not know it for eternity. So then we make the decision between light touch and in-depth. All right, got your paper out because we are going to practice this. So we have hundreds of examples, but one day I was reading with students a read aloud, and I knew that I should teach critical vocabulary before the read aloud to empower comprehension. And these were the words that were possible. Oops. And go back. There we go. And there we go. All right. I have a new computer, so I keep touching it. So I'm going to start out share my thinking on these words, and then it'll be your turn. So they're going to listen to me read Enemy Pie, a great read aloud. So there were words that were suggested that I pre-teach, but too many words. So I need to go through this and make some decisions. Maybe there's some words that I could assume was in the student's lexicon. Some other words that could get light touch, and some words that would get more in depth because they would be useful in the future. Okay, so the first word, and read the word, perfect. Perfect. Okay, so I said to myself, they're in second grade. They've heard the word perfect probably. Someone in the room had a perfect paper. Maybe they had a perfect spelling test. Of course, they had the perfect teacher. So I said to myself, I'll give it the lightest touch. When something has no mistakes in it, everything is right about it, it is perfect. Next word, trampoline. Now here's the problem with trampoline. It's not the meaning, which is quite concrete. If we sounded it out, it would be trampoline, trampoline. And so I'd have to be certain to teach kids the pronunciation of this word. That's the challenge of it. Now, Trampoline is very concrete. I could show them a picture. And the day I taught it, I showed them a picture from the book of this is a trampoline. Today, people jump up and down on it for exercise or just for fun. And that day I stood up and modeled jumping on a pretend trampoline. And that was all we got it. Light touch, concrete, easy to learn. But the next word, what is it? Yes, enemy. This is a word I taught because it was critical to the book, partly embedded in the title. It was critical to the theme of the book, was this this main character invited a boy over who he felt was his enemy. And so understanding the concept of enemy. So up to now, this is the only one I'm teaching in depth. Then we have the next word, recipe. What's the problem with recipe? It's the pronunciation. If you use all of your decoding skills you learned in K1 and 2, you're going to say recite. Recite. Problem with recite is that you won't recognize recipe in it. So I had to teach them the pronunciation. And I said, but it's about food. They'll get this pretty easily. So I said, this word is recipe. What word? Recipe. And I said, when you want to make a new food, you need directions on how to make it. And then directions are called a recipe. So if you wanted to make a new food and you had directions how to make it, those directions are called a perfect recipe. So light touch, but I did tell them the meaning of it. Now here's a hint from the research on teaching vocabulary. When possible, you want to put words that are semantically, meaningfully similar together. So I want you to look at the screen and put your finger, and do it, put your finger on the word that I should teach next, but don't say it, but just put your finger on it. A word that would be semantically related to recipe. My hope is that you are touching ingredients. Raise your hand if you had ingredients. Perfect. So I changed the list so that I could relate it. And I would say, this word is ingredients. Say the word, ingredients. But I go one step further, knowing the pronunciation is so important. I would say, put your hand on your desk, and wherever you are, do it. And we're going to tap out this word, saying the oral syllables. And my turn first, ingredients. Say it with me, everybody. Ingredients. Say the whole word, ingredients. Why would we do that? Well, because of the research that shows, research by Lene Airy and her research team. If you cannot pronounce the word accurately, you cannot attach meaning to it, store it cognitively, and retrieve it. Our brain searches the word through the phonological representation of the word, ingredients. So we're careful about teaching the pronunciation. So that was still light touch on the meaning though. When we're following that recipe, those directions that tell us how to make a new food, it tells us what we want to put in that food. I made this morning a tomato-based vegetable bean soup. And in the ingredients that goes into the recipe, ingredients that go into that soup was first see, what did I put in it first? Onions, and then I put carrots in it, and then I put the spices into it. Then I put the beans into it. Then I put the tomatoes, and all of those were ingredients. Light touch. Next, we're getting up to the part you're doing. If you have it in front of you, circle disgusting. Disgusting was critical to the story. because he wanted his father to make a enemy pie, name of the story, that would be to eat by his supposed enemy, another second grader. So they had to know disgusting. It's also a word you can use in the future. How many times are things disgusting, even for second graders? You're going to have a test on Friday of all your spelling words. Oh, that's disgusting. So I taught this word in more depth because they could use it in a story. There was a disgusting smell that arose from the kitchen. So up to now, enemy and disgusting taught in depth. Okay, what kind of word is this? Whisper to yourself what it is. I'm hoping you said compound word. So let me just teach you how to teach your kids about compound words. So compound word is two words that are put together to make a new word. And those words here are earthworms. So we read it left to right for the pronunciation, earthworms. But when we go to figure out the meaning, we go to the second word and ask how it relates to the first. Earthworms are worms found in the earth. A daydream is a dream you have during the day. A mailman is a man who delivers the mail. It's a very useful thing to teach your students because the meaning is clearer if you start with the second word and ask how it relates to the first. Light touch. All right, so it's now your turn. So here we have the remaining words. And I'm going to suggest to you that I'm only going to teach 2 of them. And your job on your paper is to write down your 2 favorite words for in-depth instruction, with the others getting light instruction. So think about the list of criteria. I know, critical future. And pick out your 2 favorite words. Okay, now, there is no scientific perfection in selecting the words, but I will give you some thoughts that I had as I did this. So first, I considered horrible. I believe by second grade that they've heard the word horrible. Someone has said, that's a horrible kid, that's a horrible dog, that's a horrible pie, that's a horrible. That kid may have been called horrible. So I thought this was known. I just would say when something is very bad, we could say it is horrible, the end. Now I know some of you might have picked out boomerang, which in the story, the children played with a boomerang, but it is very concrete. It is not used a lot in the future. So I gave it the light touch. I simply said, here's the picture in our story. This toy they're holding is a boomerang. And today, a boomerang is most often used as something that we would use as a toy. And if we throw it perfectly, it comes back to us. If I throw it perfectly, it'll come back to us. And so that's all it got. Now, one day I used this example in the year before COVID. And I was in Queensland, Australia, and they totally disagreed. They thought it was a critical word in their culture that should be more in-depth. Okay, I gave them that. And if I was teaching boomerang with older kids, I would certainly introduce the second meaning of anything that you do, particularly if you do something negative, it comes back to you. But I gave it light touch that day. Then I have all these words that could be taught. But the day I taught it, I chose nervous and relieved. Why? The relationship. It's sort of like a recipe and ingredients. They're related. And so they are going to be easier to learn separately in relationship to each other. You are very, very, very nervous to do something. It's all over. You're relieved. You have to give a speech in class. You're very nervous about it, but finally it's over. You're relieved. So hopefully the materials that you've chosen have already been thoughtful about the choice of words, but consistently they have too many. You need to narrow it down, use our list of criteria. Now, here is another list. And this one you're going to do on your own. And you're going to read through them and write down your 4 favorite words. Raise your hand as soon as you have your 4 picked out, so I know I can move on. I'm looking at hands raised with 4 words on their page. Excellent. Susan's set. And Tina's ready to go. So is Michelle. Beautiful. Okay, now, there could be lots of difference of opinions on this. And so just check yours against my thinking and realize that your thinking may be as brilliant as mine. This was the first chapter in a book I was reading with students in 5th grade called The Family Under the Bridge. Took place in Paris. It took place during the Great Depression, and it was about a homeless man who befriended a mother and his 2 children. And if the mother was homeless at that point, was living under a bridge, and if she was caught, she would be taken away and put in some kind of labor camp, and the children would be put in an orphanage to be adopted. So he helped out. So here's my thinking. Monsieur means Mr. 5th graders know Mr. I would just tell them this is French for Mr. Cathedral. It ended up getting light touch because I said the students knew what a church was. And I said, if we had a church that was very, very important to a faith, they might call it a cathedral. So they're relating it to something they know, which was church. However, I taught coward because they had to cower, hide under the overpass to not be seen by the police. And I also thought coward because it sounds like coward. I didn't want the students to confuse the 2 words. I hope you didn't circle hidey hole because it's a hole you hide in. And the 2 types of flowers, they walk by a flower stand, hyacinth and oleanders. The most you would do is, they're a flower, they're a flower. In the story, I did teach fragile because, first of all, the old man would take a flower, even though it was very fragile, and put it in his pocket to be seen. But his heart was also fragile, easily broken. Critical to the story and a useful word in the future. Sometimes you just teach something hoping the kids will take it into their heart and use it. So I taught gratitude. And so that was critical to the story too. And I didn't know if I had a very high performing group who knew all the other words, I might teach to be very, very tidy, to be fastidious. But I did teach loitering. Now, because they couldn't loiter or they'd be caught. But I could use it also. No loitering at the drinking fountain, no loitering at the door. So I could use it as a teacher. Roguish. So two boys were uncivil and out of control. They were roguish. I would give that one a light touch, and they probably knew adventure. So we get really good at this thinking, though I think it's more interesting to do with like all the third grade teachers looking at the same list and picking out the words. Even makes it where three heads are better than one. So let's just do one more. A read aloud that was going to be taught words beforehand. And these were possible words from the story that I wanted to teach directly. And again, on your paper, write down your 3 favorite words. All right, that day, I said to myself, the topic of the book that we're reading in our STORM Knowledge Network is on tornadoes. So the whole book is about tornadoes. So I said, well, at least a definition that it is a strong storm that had both wind and strong rains and strong winds, that I would introduce that. And then as we read the book, they learned more and more and more. But sometimes it's useful if you can relate the words. And so I decided, and I'm going to tell you right away, I taught a little more than 3. But I introduced tornado lightly to be expanded on. They just knew it was a very bad storm that contained lots of rain and wind. And then I introduced the word violent, that and utilized that the winds could be very violent and cause damage and devastation. So I directly taught those words. And you say, but oh, how about condensation? And that was a word that I introduced as we read the story because it had lots of information about condensation within the chapter. So it takes having the materials, becoming familiar with it, and picking out the words. Well, a few little extra hints. Big one. When you go to pick a word to teach, it is easiest if you would teach the easiest member of the family. So one day I was asked to teach piteously. These little wolf cubs cried piteously to get their mother's attention. That's really hard to teach, but pity is easier. One day I was asked to teach desperation, but it's easier to teach desperate and then relate it to the word desperation. So get ready to say out loud what word you would have taught first. I bet you said employ. The ability to get employed. Commonality. Commonality is really difficult to teach, but not common is easy. Abstractedness. Our art teacher would say, oh no, I'm going to teach abstract. Okay, I do not understand why this law has not been applied by people who write curriculum, because it's always easiest to teach the easiest member of the family and then relate the other words to it. Next hint. We already saw a little bit of that when we put words together like recipe and ingredients, like nervous and relieved. Words, if they can be organized semantically in terms of meaning, they're easier to obtain. So let's look at some examples. In math, I could be teaching words that directly relate to each other: an acute angle, a right angle, obtuse angle, a straight angle. So in every subject area, we often have words that could be a cluster of words that are related. One day I was teaching in Arizona, and I was teaching the science unit in 5th grade on rocks. And these were the words that they suggested I teach. But I looked at them right away and said, as a foundation of understanding rocks, I should teach together igneous, sedimentary, and metamorphic. So that is exactly what I did, and we learned the meanings of each of those. Okay, let's take another situation where in 3rd grade, the students were reading a book, and it had all of these words that they were to learn. And I said to myself, oh no, what can I do to make this easier to teach? I said, categorize, categorize. So I went through and I said, here's some words that are dog descriptive words. A runt, puny. Here's some dog action words. They scamper, they sniff. Some trainer words. I wean them, will get their wits about them. I craft things for them. Some sled words, some weather words that they needed to learn, but I put them in clusters for ease of teaching. Categorize, making these all easier cognitively to obtain. Okay, another way to order words is to put them in order that would tell a story. So this is from a unit in social studies, and I put the words in order and gave them a little story. So you're going to say the word, so say it out loud. So on the East Coast, we had many, colonies. And the colonies were under the rule of the royalty in Great Britain. Now, Great Britain needed money. And so they said, residents, you have to pay what? Taxes. Not just if you are living in Great Britain, but also if you are living in the colonies in America. Now, the colonists didn't like paying those taxes. They had many grievances. And no, we don't even have any representation. No one from the colonies is in Great Britain say we don't want to pay these taxes. And they wanted representation. They wanted some people standing up for them and representing them. When they didn't get it, they had grievances, and this led to a revolution, even led to a war, saying, we want our independence. We want our own form of democracy. See what a story does to your retention? Humans live by organizing information in stories. So oftentimes I will do this, but then here's what I did that same day. I gave the students the list and I said, stand up and face your partner and pretend that you are a historian and you're telling about this and you're having a conversation. And so the students had to have a conversation. Do you know what's happening in the colonies right now? No, what's happening in the colonies? Well, they're being asked to pay taxes by Great Britain. Oh no, that must be really terrible for them. What kind of grievances are coming out? Well, they want a representation. That's exactly what the kids did. They had to check off the words that they used in conversation. I love that activity for really low prep but high outcome review. Okay, another hint. And if the students already know a relative of a word that you are to teach. Link them together. So one day we're reading a passage that had executioner. And I said, when you execute someone, what do you do? Yes, you kill them. So the executioner would be the person that kills them. Or I had mini. The word they were to learn was miniature. I had mini. And I said, if you had like a mini candy bar from Halloween, is it little or big? Little. If you had a market that was a mini market, was it big or small? Small. So a miniature must be something that is small, linking it to what they already know. All right. So we've selected the words. We're conscious of other ways that we could strengthen our teaching. And now let's look at the vocabulary routine. But first, I want you to bring out your thoughts before you look at it. Say that you are teaching a word, and I want you to write down the steps that you normally go through, just notes on them. So maybe you say, well, first I present the word, and have them repeat it. So would you jot down the routine that you are now using? Okay, do you have them there? Okay, so I just want to show you how much I appreciate this group of teachers, because each time I've asked questions, the richness of your answers have been so great. So you're just going to compare it to what I've used over the years, and you may even have something that's better. So this is the routine that I use very consistently. And so read it with me. Introduce the word's pronunciation. Might even slow it down. And if it's a multisyllabic word, tap out the oral syllables in the word to guarantee pronunciation. Then I'm going to introduce the word's meaning with a student-friendly explanation, or in some cases by listing out the parts of the definition, what are called the critical attributes. Then I'm going to illustrate the word with some examples. Many times it's useful to juxtapose it to non-examples. And then I'm going to ask questions to check their understanding. So yes, my class is going to have the flood, but for the few, particularly the ones that need in-depth instruction, this is the routine I will use. So we're going to teach a word together. We'll stop, and then I will explain what we were doing. And then I gave you a whole bunch of other examples, just so that you could sit down with your third grade teachers or your second grade teachers and maybe practice by teaching a word to them, just to get the flow of the routine. So first step, introduce the word's pronunciation. So let's do this together, and teaching it with me, and go. This word is relieved. What word? And the students would say relieved. Continue. Tap and say the syllables in relieved. Relieved. Again, relieved. What word? Relieved. So the goal here is to ensure that you know the pronunciation. So often the students have not heard words that we are teaching, so they are not strong on the pronunciation. But remember, if you can't pronounce it, you can't attach meaning to it, store it, and subsequently retrieve it. And then we introduce the meaning. And in the books written by Isabel Beck and Margaret McCowan, They suggest introducing particularly tier two words using a student-friendly explanation. So let's go down here and teach it together and begin. Be sure you're talking out loud. When something that is difficult is over or never happened at all, you feel relieved. So if something that is difficult is over, you would feel relieved. So in a sentence, it is a student-friendly explanation. When something that is difficult is over or never happened at all, you feel relieved. And then there is a verification of it. So if something that is difficult is over, you would feel relieved. That is exactly what we would do for relieved, a tier 2 word. But if I had a domain-specific word, I would probably do it this way. This was the definition in the book, but I broke it down visually into the critical attributes, all of which what has to be present in order for it to be a plane, in this case, the noun. That a plane is a landform. Landform, remember our compound words, it forms the land. And it's a large area, so your backyard cannot be a plain. Of flat land with few trees. So when I have a landform that's a large area with flat land, few trees, we call it a plain. Now, if I'm teaching math, domain-specific words, I would list out the critical attribute. If I was teaching science, I'd list out the critical attributes. If I was teaching an art word in that domain, I'd list out the critical attributes. 2 ways, depending on the word. Is it a suitcase word, general word, or is it domain-specific? Okay, so I've introduced the pronunciation and the word. And now I'm going to illustrate it with some examples. They could be concrete examples, could be a picture, a visual example. Boy, are we lucky to have Google Images. Or it could be a verbal example. And so let's just look at what did I do with this word. And so I can only remember 2 times in my whole 55 years of teaching that I brought an object to school to teach the students. But if it was possible, it would make it easier to learn. One time I was reading before Halloween, just passed by, the book Pumpkin, Pumpkin, The Life Cycle of a Pumpkin, a definite thriller. And they needed to know what a vine was. And I was in San Diego. I stepped out of my hotel room, a wall covered in vines. I just leaped up, pulled one off, took it to class. Because it's easier to learn a vine from a vine than it is from a picture. But another way we can make it more concrete is adding actions and gestures. So some of you have taken GLAD training over time to be able to support students learning an additional language. And they use gestures. So with the word relieved, I said, when you feel relieved, when something is difficult is over, you often go like, relieved. Everybody show me relieved. You know, when this pandemic is over, we'll be relieved. When we don't have to wear a mask and use social distancing, I don't know about you, but I will be relieved. So we can add a gesture. Of course, we can also use visuals. And really, there's no excuse for not using visuals because we can just go relieved. Ooh, pictures. Oh, I like that one. Download it into my PowerPoint. I'm looking good. So read this example with me and go. Marcus was relieved when his job interview was over. He felt relieved at the gesture. We could do just a verbal example. Read it with me. When a difficult spelling test is over, you feel relieved. So I could use a concrete example. I could do a visual example, or a verbal example. And then I'm going to ask questions to check for understanding. So this time I'm going to call on some of you, so be ready. So I'm the teacher and I say, listen, when Maria was told that the soccer game had been canceled, not going to happen, she said, I am so relieved. I want you to think why Maria might have felt relieved. And you're going to say the answer to yourself, starting with, Maria might be relieved because. Talk into your hand, since you're not wearing your mask. Start with, Maria might be relieved because. Okay, and Katie, unmute and share your example.
Maria might be relieved because she wasn't feeling well that day.
Ah, excellent job. Thank you very much. Would Holly open up and say her sentence?
Yes, Maria might be relieved because she was nervous about the game.
Excellent. Nice job using our previous vocabulary term. And Loretta, good to see you. Can you give us your sentence?
Maria might be relieved because, Maria might be relieved because she hurt her foot yesterday.
Excellent job. The day I did this, one girl said, Maria might be relieved because she really hated soccer. The only reason she signed up for it was her mother wanted her to make new friends, and she really wished she never had to play soccer before. So we knew that this girl would be relieved if her mother said she didn't have to play soccer. Now, I'm really stressing use of sentence stems, because if I had not used Maria might be relieved because, and I called on someone, they might say, well, you know, she got hurt, or she doesn't like to play in the dirt, but they wouldn't use the academic language we want. Whether we give them a verbal sentence starter or put it on the screen, this needs to be a consistency in our instruction in science and social studies, in art, so that the students use the vocabulary. I could ask them questions to discern between examples and non-examples. I could have them generate their own example. One time when I was relieved was. So there are many questions I could ask, but specific questions, not just saying what does relieved mean, but specific questions that I was, as a teacher, know if they knew it or not. So that is the instructional routine that we could use. Now, no matter what routine you're using, here are some things that you could add to it that would make a difference. You could, first of all, I put in many examples here just so you had other ones to refer to. But I wanted to show one particularly in math because I was asked math questions. Now we would use the same big steps in math. Introduce the word's pronunciation. Parallel. We would share with the students the meaning by bulleting out the critical attributes. When we have two lines, equal distance from each other, that will not ever intersect, we call it parallel. And then we would want to illustrate this with both examples and non-examples. So these two lines are parallel, they're equal distance from each other and will never intersect. These are not parallel because they intersect. These are not parallel because if we extend this line, it would intersect. Have you parallel, not parallel? So examples and non-examples was useful there. But then in checking understanding, examples and non-examples would be helpful. Are they parallel? No. Why? Because they'll intersect. Are they parallel? Yes, because they're equal distance, will never intersect. And then having the kids make up their own examples of parallel and not parallel. The power of examples and non-examples. So I'm not going to go through all of these because they're for you to practice. You can teach migrate, and I've written it out for you with the word family. Migrate, migration, migrant. You can teach survive. And I wonder how they survive, those deer. Word family. You can teach abundant to your partner as you practice. So I wrote out some practice exercises for you to get the rhythm of it down. Maybe you want to teach a science word with examples and non-examples on fossil. Okay, so I'm going to do one more thing. This was emailed to me. I have a range of students in my second grade. When I'm teaching vocabulary, I want to involve my students. So I start by asking them if they know the meaning of the new word. And this way I honor their prior knowledge. Is this a good practice? No, that is not a good practice. Why? Why is it not a good practice? It seems like honoring their prior knowledge is a good idea. Well, here's the reason. If I start by saying, does anybody know the meaning of the word? First of all, some students are going to give inaccurate information. And you're just as likely to learn inaccurate when you're in second grade, third grade, and fourth grade as accurate. Do you know, this is an example from one of our videos. Does anybody know the word anticipate? Anticipate, raise your hand if you know anticipate. One kid raises a hand and says, you know, like you like it a lot. Yeah, anticipate, you like it a lot. Maybe confusing it with appreciate. Oh, no, not that word. Now, does anybody else know anticipate? Anticipate, and it's on the board, and kid raised their hand and says, well, you're against something, you know, you're anti, you're against something. Well, no, not in anticipate. No. Well, you eat something? You eat something? That's anticipate. No, that's not anticipate. Now we've just given out so many wrong answers. And if you have little background knowledge, you're picking one of those up. Here's the rule. Ask, teach, then ask. Teach, then ask. Teach, then ask. That's the rule. There is another problem. You might call on a child and they might say, yes, I know anticipate. When you think about something that's happening in the future that you really can't wait to have happen, you anticipate it. For example, at this Halloween, I anticipated getting candy. Yes, so anticipate means, and then the teacher says, oh God, they all know it. I can skip all instruction. See, that's another problem. Teach, then ask. So I said to the teacher, teach it. When you anticipate something, you expect that something will happen or you look forward to something happening. It means that you expect it or predict it. Here's an example. In December, students anticipate the winter holiday. They look forward to the holiday. They anticipate it. In May, students anticipate, they're thinking about it, they're thinking it's happening at the end of the school year. They are thinking about summer activities. If you were going to the zoo, you might anticipate seeing animals like elephants and zebras. If you went to McDonald's, you'd anticipate having a big burger. God, I haven't had a big burger for 2 years. And a milkshake. God, that sounds good. So let's check your understanding. If you get in line for lunch, what do you anticipate? Begin by saying, when I get in line for lunch, I anticipate. You see, you are still capturing the prior knowledge of the students, but you're certain that all of them are on the same page for anticipate. You're asking higher order questions, like if I get in line for lunch, I anticipate. getting a delicious lunch and milk. And she said, the teacher who wrote me the email said, you're right. I get wrong information and I get brilliant answers and move on too fast. So I'm going to now teach, then ask. Teach, then ask. Why in this? It's almost 2:15, isn't it? Yes, put your thumb up if you think we're almost done. Darn. But I ended up here with growing up, my favorite place to go was Dairy Queen. We lived in little towns that was the only restaurant. When you go to Dairy Queen, I anticipate that we will have ice cream sundaes in honor. And in each hour before we leave for Dairy Queen, my anticipation grows, teaching the word relatives. Now you have a very long handout. Today we covered the most common questions, which is how to select the words. And the second question was, what kind of routine should we use? So we covered two really important things in our time, but there is more to cover. And so I'm going to meet with the team to figure out how we're going to do that, because you're too good to have your learning stop here on this very important question. But in the meantime, if you just do what we've talked about, fast mapping, a flood of words, carefully selecting the words for in-depth instruction, and very systematically teaching words with a routine. And the routine is to introduce first the pronunciation, introduce the meaning, illustrate it with some examples, and ask questions to check their understanding. So may you have a wonderful November till I meet with you again. I might meet with you virtually, you never know. It has been a delight. Keep vocabulary going. It is not for the moment, it is for eternity. Our children need both a flood and a few of vocabulary. So I'm sending it back to, is there anything special that our people need to know? Tabitha or Loretta, any of you?
I don't see anything on the chat.
We could say goodbye to everyone then, except the team. You know yourself, the team. Stay on as we say goodbye. Wave as we say goodbye. Bye, Todd. Thanks for answering that question. See you again, Anne. Bye, Megan. And Susan, stay after. Excellent. And Becky, stay after. Bye-bye, Alicia. Bye, Michelle. Check this out with your domain group. And